resources to help find them and also require them to share in this very large cost to clean up the San Fernando Basin.
Yeah. So, and has the adjudicatory process interfered in any way, or?
That I don't know. I'd have to go back and ask about if the adjudicated process. I don't, from my perspective, I'm not sure. I don't believe it's interfering. I can tell you that we, in other areas of our basin, such as the Tujunga spreading grounds and other areas where we can spread, what does impede us are sometimes our waste discharge requirements. We have a lot of water quality requirements that are similar to, primary MCLs, and we have to meet those before we can spread. So we're holding a lot, we're treating a lot when this is pretty pure water.
Yes, and I know in some parts of the state, just to build on that point, naturally occurring contaminants can sometimes be a challenge when it comes to meeting basin plan objectives.
That's correct, and also legacy pollutants.
Okay.
And as you know, our San Fernando Basin is primarily from legacy pollutants. And so really it's the funding, I think, that's holding us up. We need some sort of support and help there.
Okay.
Yes. When you refer to regional, that the state invests in regional groundwater banking or regional conjunctive use projects, are you referring to, are there examples that you're thinking of, or are you thinking of things that would actually be conveyed, projects north of the Tehachapi's that would benefit south, or are you thinking regional within your basin?
We're thinking regional within our basin, but that would be regional throughout the state.
Okay.
Right, I mean, each region.
Sure. And then just to be fair to the earlier question I had to Aqua was, in thinking about the funding that the state should be contributing, does LADWP have a perspective on a public goods charge?
I believe we do. I would have to get back to you on that one as well, on the public goods charge. I know that we have a problem with it. But I don't know all of the elements behind it, so I'd have to, we'll have to put that in our letter to you, Martha, or get back to you. I could have Cindy Montanez or somebody get back to you on that. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a valuable discussion on water quality. Thank you, Catherine.
Great, thank you.
Next, we have Mark. I don't know if this is Larson or Carson. Honest and L and a C can look similar. Mark, thank you.
That's Mark Larson. So my handwriting isn't always the best. Apologize for that. Thank you very much for the opportunity. This has actually been a great day and some really good discussion going on, and thankful to have the opportunity to comment. I derived most of my comments from things I heard this morning, so I'm just going to kind of build on those and not start from scratch. And I want to thank Mr. Burns for his comment recognizing the work on water entities parts and a lot of good work that's going on. And I'll make a confession, and that is that we aren't always very good at talking about what we do. We tend to put our heads down and work, and I know in the case of the entity I work for, which is Cuya Delta Water Conservation District in the Tulare Lake bed area, we've tended to maybe work under the radar more than we should, and therefore, we don't often get a chance to talk about the projects that we're working on. Had a recent visit from Mrs. Davis a few months ago, and I found that there wasn't enough time for me to talk about all the things that we're doing in the basin, and so it's encouraging to see that acclamation there. First off, in terms of, just wanted to make a comment in that with the integrated regional water management process, the groundwater management plans, and the CASGIM process, of which the Cuyah Delta Water Conservation District has been the lead agency in all of those, as well as the, I said the local groundwater management plan. It seems like it really does become a great opportunity to meld this all together. And I know that also presents a lot of challenges, but I think that also helps make a very solid plan that's locally based, which you've heard many times today. So I won't beat that too much, but the reality is I can think of some big differences from water entities from one end of the state to the other. And I'll give you an example. You've got Paul Goslin from Butte County, who's very, very active in all this water. I have in Tulare County also an agency that's very concerned with water management, but is not as active. The reality is our way of addressing these groundwater management changes would be probably very different than what happens in Butte County, and I think that's okay, especially if they're effective and if they reach the goals. So just an encouragement, and because I know there seems to be a desire, and I understand this, to develop a framework under which the authority should be set up. And if we go too far on that and lose the flexibility, that's where we may not have plans that are as effective if they're trying to be shoehorned into some bookends that are a little too tight. Secondly, I wanted to give you some encouragement. I know there's also some concerns that this not become another AB 3030 or 1938 where some entities implement it, say, oh, we're the one, we'll do it, go away, we've done our part, and really not implement anything and simply go through the motions so that it looks good. I can speak personally, we get it. We understand that we now have to address groundwater management in a way that's different from the way we've done it in the past. That a lot of the tools that we've done in the past are very valuable, but we need to start adding to our toolbox and putting in some new pieces to that. And some of them are going to be, we're going to have to swallow hard. Looking at the demand side, as Paul Hendricks, who's within my area, that's going to be hard for us. But I think what I'm seeing from the water entities, from the board of directors, from the farmers in the area, they're recognizing we have to start looking at that. And then my last comment is in regards to recharge. We had some comments earlier today as well as this afternoon. Recharge is such a critical element in all this. And if we cannot get to a place where recharge is considered a reasonable and beneficial use of water, we've got huge problems here. The district was formed in 27 and has been using recharge as a major element. You take that away, and I don't know what our groundwater conditions would be today. So encouragement that we crack that nut as well in this process, because I think that's going to be very important. Thank you.
Mark Larson, very good comments. Do we have any questions, comments? Steve, I'm counting on you. Okay. Gary?
Just really more of a comment. I appreciate acknowledging our past efforts from really all the way from AB 3030 and onwards and the progress we've made, but yet where we've not really gotten to where I think a lot of folks are looking for is ultimately a sustainable management. So I appreciate I guess the acknowledgement that we need to go further than where we've been.
And if I could use that as a segue, I thought one of the intriguing points that Lester Snow made this morning is scanning all that we have done in the past to see if there's some opportunity for regulatory relief or collapsing some of this so that we're not just adding another thing on top, but perhaps, I would love it from the district's point of view as folks testify that they help identify. They may be small incentives, but they could be very important incentives in the process of doing this as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that'd be important.
I could build on that a little. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I appreciate the leadership you've shown to be lead agency. We've learned at the State Water Board that that's a burden and, a privilege, but a burden to do within our IRWM programs. And so thank you for that local leadership. But building on that, the State Water Board and we have our relationship with the regional water boards, we're interested in convening those dialogues about, as we started to do there with LADWP, what are the impediments? If we have our basin plans set up that are hydrologically based, but often folks like yourselves might look at it just in terms of the regulatory relationship you might have with the regional board. But when you go about this process of looking at what might be impediments to doing sustainable groundwater and integrated water management, I would encourage you to look at basin plan requirements, there are a lot of which were set up in the 70s, as specific ways we could surgically improve our regulatory frameworks so that we're not getting in the way. And maybe even, I think the word was used earlier, empowering local entities that do integrated water management and informing the basin plans that state and regional boards work on. So, not just, the permit structures, but maybe our regulatory planning structures too. I don't know if you've got any specific examples of running into barriers in those type of forums.
Well, thank you. You point out the complexities that we have in dealing with the issues in our area. Like a lot of the southern San Joaquin Valley, especially in the eastern foothill or just at the base of the valley there with nitrates and stuff, and we recognize that the CV salts process is going to be something that's really important for us. And as we look at that and how that weaves together with the basin plan, certainly we have some big challenges there, and we need to take on some aspects of that to date we have not. And so it's going to require us thinking out of the box and weaving all these programs together in a way to best address that. So thank you.
No, that's great. And I want to encourage that because, yes, it's complex. But in the end, if we don't address, I think someone earlier said, it'll be just something that we wished we'd addressed when we had this opportunity. And so I encourage that creativity and bringing specific examples to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, first, thank you for taking the time to talk with me and show me around your district.
Sure.
It was part of the early process for me for learning about how it actually works on the ground. It sounded to me like you suggested that being required to do a groundwater management plan, either a 3030 or a 1938 plan, might be creating some new burdensome responsibilities or requirements. Do you have an alternative suggestion? At the end of the day, I think at the state, we just want to know that it's getting done. So do you have any alternative suggestions about how we might close that gap if we didn't require those plans?
Yeah, I apologize, Ms. Davis. I did not have that intent at all. It may have been the words I chose. I think the basis for the 3030 and the 1938 are what needs to be done and more. I merely was trying to address the fact that I know all those elements haven't been implemented to the full extent that I think they were intended to be, and I gather some frustrations that maybe this process ends up with the same results. And I guess I was trying to emphasize that I recognize that's one of the issues here and that we need to put in some firm parameters, but we also have to allow the flexibility, which is really kind of some finesse there that's going to be difficult, I think, for all of us to manage.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we have Paul Goslin from Butte County. You had a wonderful introduction from your colleague here.
Thank you. That was not planned. Thank you, Paul Goslin from Butte County. I just have a couple small points from this morning. The county is going to be sending a letter in next week, the County Board of Supervisors, and a lot of the details that we have are going to be also contained in the letter from RCRC and CSAC, who have been working closely on this issue. And I was fortunate to work with the Water Foundation on the steering committee and the interest groups. And I want to kind of reflect back where we are today. When the Water Board came out with their concept paper last fall or late winter, and then the California Water Action Plan, it was kind of a shock as to where the state was going, and not very happy about some of the concepts that were in there, and kind of wondering where this was all going to go. And I think, General, I don't know where you thought you'd end up here today in April, on April 16th. You know, it did get everyone's attention when the budget came out and the Water Board was going to look like they were going to invoke groundwater martial law through the budget. That got everyone's attention. But as complex and controversial as groundwater is, I think from what you heard today and kind of how this evolved over the last couple months, it's kind of amazing that the structure and basic concepts, there's a lot of commonality where people are seeing where we need to go. But there's a lot of details, and the details are going to be absolutely important. But conceptually, what we're talking about is good, solid data on the basins, the means to track that, someone responsible, and the means to enforce it, with the state having oversight to watch that. And that covers not just a remediation of basins that are in overdraft or having challenges now, but for those medium and high priority basins that are the most important basins, according to the CASGEM process, for demands on groundwater on this state, which gets to the trick that most regulations are easy to do to solve and remediate a problem. What we're also trying to do is to put a structure in place, a long-term structure in place, to deal with areas that have yet to gone over the tipping point. And for Butte County, we have a number of the pieces in place. We've put a groundwater management plan in place as a county. We're also a state water project contractor. So as Kathy Mannion mentioned, just as a county didn't give us the opportunity to do that, but we do have that. We work closely with the water districts who have their own groundwater management plan, with a CASGEM agency for the entire county, working cooperatively. We have a general plan that has a water element in it, but we're starting to see from previous water budgets, we're starting to see historic lows in some of our wells, and we're redoing our water budget by the end of the year. And the question is are we beyond the tipping point? Are we going to have to start having local discussions about projections out to the future and choices that we need to make locally? And we are an ag economy. We do preserve and want to protect our streams and creeks, and how do we do that for the long haul? It's going to get to my main point, and Debbie brought it up earlier about what can be done now. These details on these issues, as much progress as we've made to date, which is absolutely considerable, the details need to be worked out, and that's going to take time. And I think we need to afford ourselves the time to do this and do it right, because this is not an immediate fix to a problem. It's a long-term structural change, which gets back to what do we do now. We wouldn't have been able to do anything in our county, and I think most of at least our region in Sac Valley, if we didn't have the technical, strong support from DWR Northern Region. All of this, everything we've talked about this morning is going to be predicated on having solid scientific data, water budgets, good understanding of the hydrology and the entire water system. The DWR has been that agency that's worked locally with counties, districts for decades, helping us do it, and that cooperation continues to this day on monitoring and assessment, reviews, technical assistance. So my immediate thing is start that process now and get DWR some of the support and some of the best management practices and technical guidance, especially for those areas that have yet to put some of these pieces together to get them a leg up. Not everyone has their water budget set or groundwater management plan, and it's not because they lack the desire. It's technical resources and the means to administer it and do that. So short answer, I think we need to continue on this path and the progress, but start immediately getting DWR some support resources to do the technical scientific support for local agencies. So, thank you.
Very helpful. I'm sure you like that,
And
didn't
Gary
you?
didn't put me up to it.
Well, I would say I was on the payroll, but I do want to acknowledge Paul Landis with our regional office, division chief, and of course Northern Region office. So again, we appreciate I think we agree with you on the necessities. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, I thought I'd take the opportunity, since you're here, Paul, as a person familiar with the county structure and everything. And of course, I appreciate your specific suggestion there, and that came out of Lester's presentation too. I think it was the friendly, well, how did he put it? It was, the friendly technical assistance without the, the threat of regulatory action or something like that. Sounds good. What I was going to maybe ask you about was a specific thing out of the Aqua report, which and many things, in these reports are new ideas that we're all considering, and certainly appreciate everyone's creativity on this one. But I couldn't help but think, are we getting ourselves into another layer, of approvals, and I relate to it because I'm not just a state person, but I have local government experience myself. So this idea of a groundwater management plan consistency determination. Right. And, Ian Gary asked the question, if we're going to go through a process like that at the county and city type level for land use decisions, does it make sense for us to structure this to also look at consistency with things like the urban water management plans, the IRWM plan if it's been developed, and that sort of thing? What are your thoughts on that?
You're talking specifically about the consistency determination with general plans?
Yeah, on a either general plan, or I could even take that to, a major, specific plan that might be contemplated in a county.
Yeah, I think conceptually that makes a lot of sense. And for example, tying it together, I mean, we're doing our water budget now countywide, and we're going to be building upon not just the county's general plan, but also the urban water management plans and the municipalities' general plans, as well as the ag water management plans are also being updated. So your budget and planning should be built upon that, and circling back when you have issues, it should all be tied together. But again, I'll go back, it's all built upon having a good, solid scientific foundation, which is never ending, and some areas need a leg up in technical support.
Yeah, so, good.
So one of the things that people have talked about, obviously, is flexibility in their governance, and potentially JPAs or other forms. It seems, and particularly in your instance, but it seems that in order to not create more requirements, but to make this as streamlined as possible, that having a county role in that, let's call it the JPA,
Right.
would be a smart thing to do in terms of efficiency. So do you think that's something that, should be required, although providing flexibility on how they all come together? But isn't it, I don't want to lead the question too much, but
You did, like, should you mandate the counties be involved in that?
be a part of that. Yeah, be a part of it.
Paraphrasing. At the end of the day, would, a county's going to have to be involved? Probably yes. Should the state, through this process, mandate it? I'll say no. Because I think to make this work, and we've heard sort of the wide variations on different subbasins and who's in there, the water portfolio, the land use, and the other agency structures runs the gambit. And I would leave it, as long as you have a strong backstop at the state that says, if locals, you don't come together and organize and somebody come forward to take responsibility and do X, Y, Z for the basin, they'll come together and they'll figure it out. And I think that's going to be the trust you're going to have with that backstop to let locals decide, because it is at the local level about personal, technical, and governance relationships that's going to make this work. Having you artificially, or maybe with good general judgment, dictate who should be there, you're going to create maybe necessarily some conflicts that didn't need to arise. So my answer is leave it as open and broad for the locals to decide how they structure themselves together. Because in the end, if they don't do it, the state had better pony up and come in and do whatever intervention they do to keep everyone honest. So I would keep that piece as open and broad as possible.
Okay, I appreciate that perspective, but I keep thinking about our population projections and where all those people are going to go. So I think it's hard not to think about a strong county, city, LAFCO.
I agree. In the end,
Yeah.
could this happen without probably municipality and county involvement? Probably not. But I think this is going to get one of these detail things tricky when you start specifying who local, you're going to have discretion on doing it, and it's the county, and then others will say, well, this group, that group, and I would leave it broad, let them figure it out, and it'll work out. Or not.
And on that great leap of faith
Right.
statement, if there are no other comments, I'd like, Steve?
Okay, just on, while we're talking about that, one of the principles that we hear repeated a lot is organized according to sub-basin or hydrologic boundary.
Right.
And so we might, as a counterpoint, it might say, well, gee, shouldn't we at least, acknowledge that should be a criterion of organization? But do you think the state should stop short of laying that out?
Of saying who's in on the governance structure?
More of how the geographic layout of it, because
Well, the
we're talking
sub-base-
about the white spots and all that business about the places that aren't getting covered under current governance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the subbasins is the Bulletin 118 subbasins is reasonable. There's issues that they're not hydrologically set, but there's a structure, we can work with that and to get something started, and you'll capture the white spots and it'll work. And we have 4 subbasins, and we'll probably capture that
So-
locally as a entirety.
Yeah. I know, it seems obvious. I just think it's worth repeating, that's one of those organizing principles that I just see coming out of this, and that we can agree at all levels potentially. So, thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Paul. Next, Kim Rasmussen.
Good afternoon. Kim Rasmussen, I'm the Environmental Program Director for Naval Station Lemoore. We acknowledge groundwater is a significant issue to California in general, and the San Joaquin Valley in particular. Naval Station Lemoore does rely on agriculture outlease as a land management strategy, and with 12,000 acres of farmed land, we do have vested interest in sustainable management of groundwater. Also, we have vested interest in the regional context because no one wants to return to the land subsidence. So what we do under our base is one, but we also work collaboratively at the local level. I'm really encouraged by progress that I'm seeing, recommendations and strategies that have been presented, and I look forward to further collaboration at the local level. In particular, I look forward to way in the future, one day when I have one water management plan and program. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. It's good to get your perspective and to be reminded of the importance of working with our military colleagues. Others? Thanks for your succinct comments. Kay Mercer, please. Kay Mercer? She has gone. Thank you. Jennifer Clary, you're still here.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Clary, Clean Water Action, and we've submitted a letter so you have our comments, and we think that there have been a lot of great suggestions, so we just tried to find areas that weren't discussed. And one thing that I keep hearing is that it's going to take time to do this, and it's going to take 20 years to do this, and I'd just like to point out that when you take a long time to do things, the people who are most impacted are the people who are dependent on shallow wells, so people who are served by small systems or not served by public water systems. So maybe what we need to think about is one of our early indicators at the 4 or 5 year mark is that you're identifying everyone who's on shallow wells and providing some kind of alternative sources for them, because either they don't have water, they're going to have to dig a deeper well at some expense, or their land is going to lose their value. And then just one other thing, we have a lot of experience with integrated regional water management, and I hope this isn't going to be like that. So I think one thing to think about is what the state should be looking at as a backstop is saying we don't really want to fund something that's pay to play or where representation is based on land ownership, because that means you're going to be looking at water supply perhaps more than water quality. And we don't want to have a program where the governance is very much concentrated with the large water systems, because if this is going to be successful, it's going to have to be a pretty broad-based program. And finally, I'm still confused about the role the county plays in this, because the county is the one that really has the most authority now. So they have the land use authority, and they have economic needs, so that's something that sort of conflicts with that. They have the ability to do well permits. They're required to authorize new wells and test state smalls. So I guess one thing to think about is if you're doling out resources, something that we identified, and all of you, I think, were part of the Governor's Drinking Water Stakeholder Group, is we looked at the state of data at the county level and the fact that so much of it wasn't available, sometimes because of legal issues and sometimes just because of programmatic issues or the program that the data was stored in. So maybe something to think about is strengthening counties' ability to participate, because I don't think we really want to take all the authority away from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have comments or questions for Jennifer?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you pointing that out. That came out pretty clear in our review of our IRWM programs last month, that they're imperfect, but there's certainly a stepping stone toward maybe, a truly integrated program would take these things into account. And so I appreciate you pointing out these sort of holes in the structure, in terms of then potentially leaving folks behind in terms of the concern about pay to play. Could the state, do you have any suggestions on how, because, a lot of times the incentives that we provide are based on competing with the best overall plan. We've done the homework, we've invested the money, we've got the best science, so we have a competitive integrated water management proposal so that the state will match it. Is there a need for us to maybe rethink, or how can we recast how we still provide incentives, but we provide resources to where they're needed for disadvantaged communities that may not be able to pay to compete?
Well, take it out of integrated regional water management. IRWIMs really aren't, somebody will bite me for saying this, but IRWIMs aren't really that competitive because you have funds from bonds allocated by region. So you really only have to compete if there's multiple IRWIMs in a region. I think the difficulty is that the IRWIMs have so many requirements, and one of the requirements is to identify the water-related needs of disadvantaged communities, and there's been kind of a limited oversight of how that's accomplished. And I just want to say that I haven't looked at the recent listening sessions, and so I don't want to speak out of turn and out of ignorance because I'm not as well acquainted as I should be. But right now, the way we fund disadvantaged communities is according to their need. Whoever's hurting the most, we try to focus money on. That is, if they're able to accept the money. So I guess it really has to do more with disadvantaged communities on technical assistance. And at that point, it also has to do with the willingness of local entities to step up and assist those communities. Because what you find is it's not necessarily an overt pay to play at the local level, but you have entities that are working on their own projects, and they don't necessarily have the capacity or haven't planned to have the capacity to assist a community that's not in their purview. And if you're a water agency, there's some real Prop 218 questions about whether you're able to assist those communities.
Exactly. I think, thanks for
Is that
putting
what you wanted me to say? Oh,
Yes, but no, but I was going to throw that in, that the 218 structure, by plopping it down on water issues, that exposes that particular flaw in that system. Because if you have to have the ratepayer only support, the rate base only support the ratepayer, then the disadvantage can be left out.
And I would say that Prop 218 could present some obstacles. I think it would be interesting to see, if we didn't have Prop 218, if some of the local entities would find other obstacles.
Okay, interesting discussion. Thank you.
On the subject of broadening the representation of communities on the governance, I think that a lot of the concern with how to do that would be on not so much with the principle that you're getting after, but with the effect of maybe limiting the options that local agencies have to put together a governance structure for a basin or sub-basin that aligned. For example, joint powers authorities, they don't naturally lend themselves to. So I'm wondering, and you don't have to answer the question in detail now, but I'm wondering if anybody's, or you or somebody else is working on a proposal that tries to get after that and reconcile it.
I haven't worked on that since 2008, so maybe Debbie Davis can answer the question. We actually had we had a lot of conversations about this around the integrated regional water management plans, and JPAs are an obstacle to investor-owned utilities as well as nonprofits. So I think that's an ongoing issue, and I don't have a good answer for it. And there's actually a group of organizations that have actually been taking a closer look at integrated regional water management planning and changes that need to be made. So for really detailed recommendations, I'd probably want to kind of bring them into the discussion.
I think it would be really helpful to have specific proposals because I think in general, the people want to make this easier, not harder, and where we're doing things that limit local flexibility, that's it's problematic. And
as you know, we've been trying to figure out what a regional structure would look like how do you solve drinking water issues on a regional level to try to bring affordability at the local level. And it's, if it were easy, it would be done. And so it's something we continue to talk about, and you're welcome to join our discussions. We kind of go around in circles on it on a regular basis.
Thank you, I do appreciate it.
Every once in a while I'm honest, sorry about that. Thanks.
Well, this was just more of a comment on this governance issue because obviously we're just more one part of this discussion, and the legislature has a couple of governance pieces of legislation before them on some of these very specific areas of the state that are trying to develop their own groundwater management structure through their new authority. And just, I guess, to point out that we are kind of within these, we're talking within these parameters and they're talking within those parameters because they're kind of debating one person per, one vote, one person versus, and then there's the other notion I think that Senate local government is pushing out in terms of giving the counties the duty of appointing the representation based on the beneficial uses of the basin. So there's a really, there's a concurrent discussion going on in the legislature that is a little more, I don't know what the word is, I don't want to describe it in a different, but it is just as broadening the spectrum of what we've discussed today that we should kind of really get your input on as well.
Very good. The last card I have is for Rob Schwartz. Rob, if there's anyone else, any blue cards, this is your last call. Otherwise, Rob, you'll be our finale.
I never get the last word at home, so this is great. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm with the Sacramento Groundwater Authority. We're a joint powers authority formed in 1998, specifically for groundwater management. We manage northern Sacramento County from the American River up to the county line. And what we did was formed as a joint powers authority with common police powers of the city of Sacramento, Citrus Heights, and Folsom, and Sacramento County. So between those four entities, we have full coverage of our roughly 195 square miles that we manage. One of the things that these groups did that was a pretty novel approach to managing our basin was they understood they had the authority for police powers, but they actually assigned a board of directors comprised of all of the overlying water agencies. 2 of those are investor-owned utilities. 2 of them are mutual water companies, which typically don't have a seat at the table or don't have any specific legislative authority to manage. We also have an appointed position for self-supplied agriculture and an appointed position for self-supplied other, and that, for example, a golf course sits on our board. So we have a 16-member board of directors, which basically makes all the management decisions in the basin. So I'm not offering as some sort of requirement, but it's a model that we've applied successfully now for 16 years. Beginning in 2003, we adopted our first fully compliant SB 1938 plan, and ever since then, every 5 years, we have updated that plan comprehensively. I think, for the most part, most of the recommendations that I've heard today, I'm very much in support of, particularly those of Aqua. I have one exception, and I had to get up and say it. It was from the California Water Foundation. the recommendation that basins be managed at the, or groundwater management be done at the sub-basin level. Excuse me. Some additional background, I was with the Department of Water Resources until 2003, and I was the primary author of Bulletin 118. So I hear a lot of discussions about the subbasins. I do understand that they basically, we went through this for years. They're basically, we define those as convenient areas for describing management activities. In many cases in the San Joaquin Valley in particular, they are geopolitical boundaries, so they'll end at county lines. In the Sacramento Valley, they attempted to use hydrologic boundaries, assuming that they were good barriers to flow. The American River is a great example. I manage the basin north of the American River. I'm dealing with contamination from Aerojet, which is south of the American River, so they are not effective barriers in any way. So I want to discourage this notion that you need to manage at the sub-basin level, because those were decisions that were made years ago, and I still think they should exist. As I said, they're very convenient for purposes of describing what's happening in a particular basin. But the gentleman from South Sutter Water District who talked to you earlier is actually, it overlies the same North American sub-basin that I do. We happen to be the southern third of what's called the North American sub-basin. South Sutter's doing a fantastic job of managing their portion of the groundwater basin. I'd like to think that we're doing the same thing, managing our basin sustainably. I think it would be a huge mistake to require that a groundwater management plan be developed at the sub-basin level. And so there was discussion about coordination. I agree, coordination, absolutely. The recommendations that Aqua has, I think, are appropriate. But the requirement that we have a groundwater management plan at a sub-basin level, I think would be a huge mistake and a step in the wrong direction, because I don't see where it would accomplish anything. It would certainly add to the burden that I would have and South Sutter would have at no additional benefit. Okay? So I want to take off my SGA hat and comment to you as a private citizen, since I hadn't coordinated any of these comments. First of all, I was encouraged to hear that there's, over the last few weeks, I've finally heard this discussion or a recognition that in general, basins in urban areas are generally being managed fairly well, mostly sustainably. There's a recognition that we're having a lot of problems in the agricultural areas. And I think it's the biggest challenge is, in the urban areas, I have the luxury of, I have 500,000 people overlying my basin, and we have a good foundation for collecting the fees that we need to manage our basin sustainably. You don't have those populations out in the agricultural areas. And one of the areas that I haven't heard, I finally heard it mentioned today, but no real discussion, semi-tropic water storage district. There's a good example that I would hope, if you haven't looked into, that you would do some more research, look into that, about a local group that got together and came up with some solutions and started figuring out how to manage their basin sustainably. So I think that there are some good models that I haven't heard you have come in front of you for those. With respect to land use coordination, it's one thing to put that in the water code. And I can tell you that I work with the county, they're on our JPA. There is some coordination during the general plan process, but there certainly isn't any checking in when it comes time to approve development. And simply putting it in the water code isn't going to do much. So they just think we're kind of cute, you know, and they wave to us. And but basically, if you want to make some real change there, you need to look at the code that defines what's in the general plan and direct them to work with the water agencies, as opposed to telling water agencies, hey, you need to go work with the counties. So simply having it in the water code, I don't think is going to be terribly effective. And finally, a very controversial notion that I would propose, and again, this is as a private citizen, you talk about backstops, and I see this as somewhere way down the road. But I do want to give you an example of something that happened here. At McClellan, we had a lot of contamination in the middle part of the basin, and when that was discovered in the late 1980s, what was immediately enacted was a prohibition zone, because we knew we had an area that had a major problem. It was a prohibition zone. You could not get a well permit. Around that was a consultation zone, so areas where the contamination could go to if you continue to pump groundwater. And so if you wanted to drill a well in that area, you had to do a special consultation with in this case, the county, which issues permits. So again, when you talk about water districts, we don't have authority to issue well permits. It's primarily going to be done at cities and counties. And I think that one approach that you might look at is somewhere down the road, if these areas cannot get their acts together, I think that the entities that have the authority to issue well permits should be compelled to have some form of a consultation and recognition that that's to me, that's the big issue, is we continue to issue permits, and I don't see how we're ever going to fix that. So again, very personal opinion on that. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Rob, thank you. I appreciate that. Steve?
Well, I, of course, have to drill down a little bit further, at least explain myself. I appreciate with your experience in developing subbasins, and I'm familiar with the geopoliticalization of it, and so I want to clarify that my interest and encouragement is in the direction of hydrologic boundary. And I realize in some basins it's all intermingled in the valley and that sort of thing. So you have to some extent, take into account those factors that you mentioned and that you took into account when you developed subbasins. So, yeah, I don't want to mislead folks to say that's the gospel. On the other hand, the principle of aligning water management with hydrologic boundary, not just groundwater basins, but the watershed that feeds it. I think we can probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, but we could agree on those principles where it makes sense.
Yeah, again, I agree with coordination. Again, a single plan overlying that area would be very problematic. And just to give you another example, Placer County has a policy through county ordinance, no growth on groundwater. And so that's a very different ordinance than we would have in Sacramento County. And resolving some of those issues in one unified groundwater management plan would be very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
So if there's not, let's just say hypothetically, not your basin, but somewhere else, you have neighboring districts, and let's say one has very few restrictions and is, making good use of their groundwater, and their neighbor recognizes that maybe there's some subsidence or other issues. Do you have a theory on what happens under those circumstances, and or what happens when the water board sees a problem and you have more than one management entity, and again, recognizing that perhaps what we have on paper are not the best boundaries, but assuming that if you've got instances where people are impacting or management entities are impacting each other, do you have ideas on how you resolve that?
Well, again, I think, and something that hasn't been mentioned actually is we talk about the Department of Water Resources should evaluate groundwater management plans. They actually did. They don't talk about that much. Did you know that? They evaluated our SB 1938 plan for compliance. So there already is a process in place, and I think that, from what I've heard, is going to continue to be one of the key steps. So if you look at what Aqua said, they said in the groundwater management plans, if you're commenting on a subbasin, they should demonstrate coordinations such that goals and basin management objectives of respective GMPs are complementary in their contribution to basin sustainability and do not conflict or impede management activities of neighboring groundwater management agencies. I think that during the determination process evaluation that the department will be going through, those things would become apparent. And if you want to evaluate the subbasin, so for example, there are 3 groundwater management agencies that manage the North American subbasin. During the process, the department should check in with the other 2 to make sure that what is being said in that plan is consistent. And then I think if you're going to see that that portion of the basin is not being managed sustainably, that's going to trigger a whole new level of, you're going to get into your backstop activities at that point. So I still think that there's a good way to work around this. Again, all I'm saying is no single GMP should be required for a subbasin because of as I said, the nature of that and the complication when you have multiple counties that are overlying them.
Can I just follow up on an inverse to that? So how small should we be allowing? Does it make sense to, you wouldn't want them to be?
Well, I think the department can tell you how many groundwater management plans there are. They're typically, there's typically a basic size associated with them. I think you'll know it. The problem is that one of the core principles is management is best done at the local level. When we say develop a groundwater management plan at the sub-basin level, you've defined what local means. I think that's kind of overstepping what we should be doing. So I'm not sure how small the smallest unit is, but typically it's down to the smallest would be a water district, and they're typically going to be managing an area of 50 or 100 square miles or so.
If you did it that way, though, how would you deal with the areas that are unrepresented at all, the white spots? How do you make sure that there's actual groundwater management going on there?
Well, you can allow the agencies that have some purview to look at whether or not they would want that responsibility. So, for example, the county might be the first level. And Placer County is another example where they have this little sliver of white area. And it's just because it's not within any of the organized water districts. They're going to have to make a decision. Do they want that white area to continue, or does the county want to step up and incorporate that portion into the groundwater management plan? And ultimately, again, it's with those white areas, it's going to be the threat of the backstop that's going to have have them decide, do they want to get in with the existing management efforts or do it on their own?
All right. Rob, really great points you made. I would just wanted, with your background, as you described, how would you see maybe some of this integration of plans that are currently going on? How would that proceed? Because I know you have background in a lot of those areas.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
So, for example, how would you integrate the groundwater management planning to the regional plans? How would you foresee that going further?
You mean the groundwater management into the integrated regional
Yes.
water management? I'm not sure I can answer that because I'm also the entity responsible for developing that plan. So
Yeah.
I've had the luxury of just having both plans. I know they're tightly coordinated. So I don't have any advice for areas that are trying to manage one versus the other.
Okay, so maybe just, do you see those having to be stronger connection between the two moving forward?
I think that the connection that exists currently is appropriate. I think that when it comes to groundwater management, for example, when I'm dealing with contamination, I'm just dealing with this set of issues over here, and I want to work with responsible parties. I work closely with the regional board, and I just think that it allows me to focus on what my duty is as the groundwater manager, and rather than worrying about what level of integration, it just sort of happens naturally. So again, I don't have advice for those areas that you're trying to tighten them up, but.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciated both your formal comments and those as a private citizen. If there are no other comments, I think we are ready to adjourn this workshop. I want to thank all of you for your patience and your intellectual engagement today. I heard several of you say that you will be submitting comments, and that is, I'm assuming that's going to be to the State Water Board or through the groundwater. Okay.
If you sorry, I'm not on. If you go to OPR's website, opr.ca.gov, and click on water and follow the links to groundwater, it'll tell you how to submit your comments.
All right, Karen, do you have anything else from the State Water Board? Thank you for hosting us today, and I want to thank my colleagues here on the panel once again. It was great to share the podium with you from across Cabinet, and I look forward to us all working together and with our many stakeholders. Thank you.